And what's up? What's up? You're hanging with the Niner Nut. Hello to all faithful 49er fans out there in this wonderful, crazy, interesting, hard to compromise type of world. I hope you're all enjoying the off-season moves, pissed off at some of the off-season moves, and kind of wondering what the hell is going on in the off-season with all these non-Niner moves that we see keep happening. I just saw a trade for Devontae Parker from the New England Patriots for a couple of draft picks. Obviously, the Patriots are trying to up their targets for Mac Jones, which makes a lot of sense because he doesn't have a hardcore number one, which they are in need of. But I digress back to all things 49ers. This episode, I wanted to bring to attention the Colin Kaepernick situation. As many of you may or may not know, Kaepernick is, was trying out again for, I guess, multiple teams or trying to get a spot in the NFL. He's 34 years old. He hasn't played in, let's see, hasn't played since 2016. So it's been 6 years that he's played. Or 5 years for that matter, because he's 34. Last time he played was when he was 29. And of course, you know, he's also doing this passing demonstration with a lot of college wide receivers. I don't know if they're eligible players coming out in this next draft, but it's also kind of another tryout, I guess, for him to show his stuff, which is, I hate to say this, but it's getting rather old. Okay. First off, let me just say that I don't do anything political. I'm not a political person. What I mean is I know nothing when it comes to politics. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I vote for Elvis. I vote for Johnny Cash. I vote for Jimi Hendrix, Rob Zombie, Jim Morrison. I don't even. I'm just a beast who lives in a cave, man. So I don't do politics. You will not find that on this episode. I do all things 49ers, and I call it like I see it. And I've seen a lot of it, and I continue to watch a lot of it because I'm a Niner nut. I try not to miss any games. Talk about Colin Kaepernick for a bit. Kaepernick, obviously 6'4", 225, really good size. Went to Nevada. Had some interesting college stats while there. He threw for over 10,000 yards in his career at Nevada, 82 touchdowns, 24 interceptions, a 142.5 quarterback rating, which is phenomenal. Just all things a phenomenal athlete. I think that he is a wonderful athletic presence. He also rushed for over 1,000 yards 3 out of those 4 years, scoring 17 touchdowns, 16 touchdowns, and 20 touchdowns consecutively in his sophomore, junior, and senior season. So obviously, he was a dual threat. Okay. Had a low percentage of passing in his college career, 58.2. But sometimes you take that into consideration depending on the offense they're in, depending on, the receivers he has, what have you, the offensive line. Not the greatest, 58.2 by any means. But I think we can all agree that he was a wonderful athlete, is a phenomenal athlete for that matter. Also was a pitcher, which makes sense. I think sometimes a lot of the time you can see the difference between a quarterback who was a pitcher and a quarterback who was not. I think it is kind of obvious in their mechanics, their wind up, their release, the way they hold the ball, what have you. Niners drafted him, of course, in 2011, second round pick, 36 pick overall, which was an interesting move. It was that same draft in which let's see, who else did we take in that draft? Well, we took Aldon Smith, the great Aldon Smith, who unfortunately, whose career was shortened by his addiction, his own personal demons, personal situations. It was also in that draft that Cam Newton went first. Okay. Looking back into that second round, had we not taken Colin Kaepernick, there were some other interesting players out there who were available. Brooks Reed, Kyle Rudolph, Lance Kendrick, Stefan Wisnowski. Let's see. Rodney Hudson. Um, I think that was the solid Randall Cobb too. That was the solid move to take at that number. Also in that draft in the third round, we selected Chris Culliver, was a decent defensive back for a bit. We also selected Kendall Hunter. He was part of that running back backfield back there during the Jim Harbaugh days. And let's see who else. Daniel Kilgore. Love me some Daniel Kilgore. Very, very good offensive lineman. Um, Ronald Johnson never really caught on. Colin Jones never really caught on. And into that seventh round, Bruce Miller, who was a fullback but was drafted as a defensive end. Go figure. And then Michael Person. So it was an interesting draft. But anyway, yeah, he was taken in the second round. And of course, that was in 2011. And, it was funny because the 2011 team, of course, was Jim Harbaugh. They were 13-3 that season after they had come off of a 6-10 season the year before in 2010 under head coach Jim Tom Sula. But under head coach Jim Harbaugh, they really destroyed expectations and went all the way to the conference championship against the New York Giants, which they lost. This, of course, was under the offensive coordinator Greg Roman, defensive coordinator Vic Fango, and just a wonderful group of coaches. Ed Donatel, John Morton, Mike Solari, the great Jim Tom Sula, who returned to defensive line under general manager Trent Balk, who did do some good things in his time as general manager. But, Kaepernick didn't see a lot of action, obviously, that first season. He only appeared in a few games. He appeared in only 3 games, 3 of 5, 35 yards. Didn't really do anything. And then, of course, in that second season, 2012, where the Niners went 11-4-1, where they made it to the Super Bowl and lost to the Baltimore Ravens 34-31, we, of course, saw, the beginning of what looked like the next great thing in San Francisco. He came into that season. It was a very interesting season for the most part because I don't know how many of you guys remember that, but Alex Smith was the starter coming into that season. Okay. And if you go back and look, we started off the season, we knocked off Green Bay, we knocked off Detroit, lost to Minnesota, destroyed the New York Jets. I was actually at that game. That was wonderful. Destroyed the Buffalo Bills, lost to the Giants, got killed to the Giants, knocked off the Seahawks, and knocked off Arizona. They were riding high. They were 6-2. Things were looking really good. And those first couple of games was very interesting because, for the most part, Alex Smith was doing pretty good that season. Which ended, of course, with him being replaced halfway through and by Colin Kaepernick. Now, that season of 2012, Smith was 6-2-1, had a 70.2 completion percentage, over 1,700 yards, 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He was sacked 24 times, which is a bit much. But on the ground too, remember, Mr. Smith had some feet too. He had some nice rushing ability, nothing crazy, nothing like Colin Kaepernick, but he had 132 yards on 31 carries, no touchdowns. But this is after, he had come back from I believe, let's see, he was in the voting for was he in? Let's see. I'm just looking over some stats for him. Comeback Player of the Year voting, where he placed number 3. in 2011. He had a really good year in 2011. He threw for 31, 44, 17 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Um, he appeared in all 16 games. So again, it was kind of strange to see him catch the bench, especially when he was playing rather well, and the team was 6-2-1. They made that switch, and then of course, we know what happened from there. Colin Kaepernick went on to do some great things for the 49ers. You can't really deny that. It was an exciting time, I think, to see him take over, and I believe the first game was against the Chicago Bears that he appeared in as a full-time starter, because Kaepernick, of course, started his first game. Let's see, just looking up some stats as we speak. Actually, he didn't start that first game against the Rams, the tie, which was their tie. Alex Smith was in that game as well. I'm going to look at, let's see. The next game was against the Chicago Bears, who they blew out 32-7. And I believe it was there that Kaepernick got his start for sure. He did. He was 16-23 for 243 and 2 touchdowns. And from there, man, he was riding high. They knock off Chicago. They knock off New Orleans. They lose to the Rams in overtime. They knock off Miami. They went into New England and knocked them off. I think that was a Sunday night game. That was a hell of a game. He had a hell of a game. And they knocked off Mr. Tom Brady and Mr. Belichick at home. They lost to the Seahawks, who were a powerhouse back then, and then beat the Cardinals, went into the playoffs, knocked off the Packers. That's when he had that wonderful run. They knocked off Atlanta. And then they lost to Baltimore in the Super Bowl. And, again, he was riding high, man. It looked like I said, he was the next great thing in football and for the 49ers as well. It looks like they had found their man. The Super Bowl game against the Baltimore Ravens didn't have a great 16-28, 302 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, sacked 3 times, ran 7 times for 62 yards. He had a much better second half than he did a first half. There was a lot of questionable calls in that game, if you know what I'm talking about, especially the last one in the end zone. And with Michael Crabtree, the one Mr. Harbaugh was not happy about. First half was an absolute disaster. But I digress back to Colin Kaepernick. So from that point on, he really established himself as the next 49er quarterback, and it was well-deserved. Again, that first year, he threw for over 1,814 yards, 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Percentage was a little low, 62.4. Second season, of course, Niners go 12-4 in 2013. 31-97 he throws for in yards, 21 touchdowns, 5 picks. All the while having some interesting rushing stats too. In 2012 he had 415. In 2013 he had 524. Okay, so again showing his dual threat that he was. Completion percentage was extremely low, 58.4 again. And of course, in 2013, the Niners went 12-4 and unfortunately lost to the Seahawks in the conference championship, which was a heartbreaker of a game. That next season of 2014, that was when things started to crumble. And they went 8-8. This was Jim Harbaugh's last year as a head coach. Unfortunately, it was a disaster that year. If you were watching, started off the season, they dumped the Cowboys, then they lost to the Bears, lost to the Cardinals, rebounded with a win against Philly, a win against Kansas City, and a win against St. Louis, and then a loss against Denver. They were 4-3, lost to the Rams 4-4. Went on a 3-game winning streak to be 7-4, and then it became a disaster. Lost to the Seahawks, lost to the Raiders, lost to the Seahawks, lost to the Chargers. So they were not where they were supposed to be that year. Kaepernick, 60.5 completion percentage, over 3,300 yards, 19 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Not too bad. just wasn't their season that year. There were things going on. They had lost a couple of players there. I believe that was the same year that they lost Patrick Willis to the foot injury. That was the same year we saw the great and only season Chris Borland came on. I loved Chris Borland, man. He had a monster season for a rookie, led the team in tackles. Then he quickly retired in concern for the head injuries. So they were really being dismantled that season. And I blame a lot of that having to do on the front office, of course. Remember, there was always that push and pull with Trent Balk and Jim Harbaugh. Harbaugh wanted control of the roster and whatnot. And Trent Balk didn't feel that way. And the great, stupid Jed York at the time had made the wrong decision and got rid of Jim Harbaugh. And I think since then, Jed York had learned his lesson in his place. Thank God. The next season, of course, was an absolute disaster. 2015 was Jim Tom Sula, head coach, and this is, of course, there's a big change now. Offensive coordinator is Jeep Christ. Defensive coordinator was Eric Mangini. There's no genius in Manginius, if you ask me. Tony Sperano, the late Tony Sperano, he did pass away, was the tight ends coach. Jason Tarver, both Jason Tarvers. And it was a disaster. Still under Trent Balk. What a terrible season that was. I remember opening night, Monday night, we blew out the Minnesota Vikings, but shortly we looked terrible. Kaepernick had a bad season, 2 of 6. He only played in 8 games. His record was 2-6. He was benched for Blaine Gabbert, which says a lot, I think. And of course, this is, Frank Gore was gone. Carlos Hyde was the quarterback. We had just to give you an example, Anquan Bolden was still there. Torrey Smith, Quentin Patton, Van McDonald. It was a bad season. It really was. It just no Patrick Willis, obviously, no Chris Borland. So we were decimated, man. Okay. It was also in this season. I will say this: let's just go through to the next year. The next year was 2016, where obviously it was a lot worse. The Niners as a whole were 2-14 under Chip Kelly. One of the worst moves they ever made. In getting him. So that 2016 season was an absolute disaster. Under head coach Chip Kelly, a stupid move by management. And again, switching of the offensive coordinator to Curtis Modkins. Defensive coordinator was Jim O'Neill. Jason Tarver was still there, at least one of the Jason Tarvers. It was a disaster. And it was obviously Trent Balk's last year. Chip Kelly, thank God, did not last more than that. But that was Colin Kaepernick's career. That's what it went up to. Now, being objective, being a 49er nut, keeping it real, and being someone who saw all of Kaepernick's progression and regression for the better of his career, I will say this about him. First and foremost, he was a phenomenal athlete, a wonderful athletic talent, kind of freakish if you ask me. Without a doubt. Probably a guy who could have played multiple sports and done good at them. Pitching, could have played some basketball maybe. Don't know if he could skate or play hockey, but whatever the case may be, he had the athletic ability. His final 49 stats, his record was 28-30. Completion percentage 59.8, threw for over 12,000 yards, 72 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, 1.8 interception ratio. So, not the greatest of stats, 28-30. 28-30 as a starter. Of course, we have to blame some of that on the changing of the team and whatnot. The completion percentage is something that always kind of concerned me about him. Never had great numbers in that year, but he did have great touchdowns to interception ratio, which was very interesting. Kaepernick, phenomenal athlete. As a quarterback, as just a quarterback, he was mediocre at best. Okay. The things he didn't possess was he didn't possess the cerebral ability to be that type of quarterback. When I say cerebral, I mean an understanding of the offense, sit in the pocket, count off the receivers, You know, I think of guys now. Again, not everybody can be Tom Brady, obviously, or Peyton Manning, but I think of guys that are in the NFL that have that cerebral ability and do it really well. And guys I'm talking about are, of course, were Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, um, so many others, man, that do it, that have that cerebral ability. You know, Alex Smith was cerebral, Jeff Garcia, Joe Montana, the great Steve Young, you know, probably one of the most cerebral quarterbacks ever. I mentioned Tom Brady already. Peyton Manning, you know, even Eli Manning. Eli Manning was, you know, as much as people want to say their thing about him, Eli Manning beat Tom Brady twice in the Super Bowl. So he was damn good. He was a cerebral guy. Sometimes I think that he tried to live too much with his arm, and maybe he wasn't the most cerebral, but he was to some extent. So that's what I mean by cerebral understanding of the offense or understanding of the game itself, the understanding of your players, or for that matter, being able to change gears and play in other offenses. It's something Kaepernick could not do. He could not do that. He could not exist in an offense that was not the pistol offense that was built around him. And let's call it like it is. Jim Harbaugh did a wonderful job of implementing that pistol offense in which he played in Nevada into the 49ers offense the seasons that he played. Now, there were a couple things against him. The defenses around the league got smart, and they started to adjust to Kaepernick and what his power was. Kaepernick's power was, of course, you know, running out of the backfield, scrambling out of the backfield, throwing on the run, or then going from throw to run. But staying in the pocket is something he could not do. He was not a pocket quarterback, not a pocket passer. And eventually, what happens to a lot of scrambling quarterbacks is they have to learn how to play within the pocket for a lot of reasons. Could be injury, could be because they slow down, and could be just because of the high impact that the game takes on their body. And you've seen that from scrambling quarterbacks such as Randall Cunningham or Steve Young, who was a big-time scrambler early on in his days. But then, you know, that took a little bit of a backseat to more of him just being a prominent passing artist. Kaepernick could not do that. And that's where I think his game just never elevated. Now, he reminds me of certain guys in the athletic area, such as Lamar Jackson and Michael Vick. That being said, and I'm not going to get too much into this, I was never a fan of Michael Vick. I thought Michael Vick was highly overrated. I thought he was a much better athlete than he was a quarterback, and I'm obviously not a fan of Michael Vick because of his what he did with those pit bulls. I'm a big animal lover. I'm a big pit bull lover. I have a pit bull, and what I think he did was disgusting, and I don't think he got what he deserved in terms of sentencing because I don't want to get into all that, but Michael Vick could never sit in the pocket and throw the ball. Okay, his game was always on the run, which is fine, but Michael Vick was highly overrated. Okay, he is not one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Not even close. Does not deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. I don't give a shit what anyone says. Was he a great athlete? Yes, he was. Phenomenal athlete. Now, Lamar Jackson, another phenomenal athlete. Quarterback, though. This past season, if you guys were watching, Lamar Jackson took a bit of a step back this season. Okay, and just looking at some numbers, you know, I like to back up a lot of my opinion with a lot of stats sometimes because it just kind of can make or break one's opinion, whatever, or one's decision. Lamar Jackson this season, most interceptions he's ever thrown in his career at 13. His touchdowns went from 26 in 2020 to 16 in 2021. He sacked the most, 38 times. Quarterback rating dipped down to 87.0. Completion percentage stayed the same. But you also saw him turn the ball over a lot on the ground, which was rather not the best. I mean, he only had six fumbles, but in his career he's had 37. That's only 4 years. He has a problem holding on to the ball when he's scrambling. You also saw his rushing yards take a dip from 1,005 to 767. So, you know, it's interesting to see what's going to happen with him because, again, I think eventually he's going to have to figure out what are you? Are you just a scrambling guy, or can you sit in the pocket and throw the ball? He's only 24 years old, so he's still relatively young. But the offense he plays in, of course, is part of the reason too. I mean, they kind of use three different running backs, and they're not really a passing team whatsoever. So I'm wondering, well, can they be a passing team? Can Lamar Jackson sit back there and throw the ball if he had to do it a bunch of times a game? And looking at his stats from this past season, he only threw for over 300 yards twice. Everything else was in the 200 range. So that's an interesting, that's something interesting to take into consideration. Now, I mentioned Lamar Jackson because I think he's in that area where he's a great athlete, similar to the two I mentioned in Colin Kaepernick and Michael Vick. But that's what Kaepernick was. He was limited as a quarterback. I don't think he was limited athletically, but he was limited as a quarterback. I think he could have really flourished had he been used elsewhere. He could still possibly be playing as a backup, a 2 or a 3, and as someone you bring in to do a couple things, maybe split out, maybe scramble. Yeah, for sure. He definitely could. That being said, that's not the case. He's been out of football for 5 years. Now, one of the facts is that he had a chance to play for 3 different teams in that time: Miami Dolphins, Baltimore Ravens, and the Seattle Seahawks. What the word was that I heard is that he was not going to be the starter, and that's not what he wanted. Well, you had 3 chances to play, and he declined on all of them. Okay, so if he wanted to play, he definitely could have. I just don't know what capacity it would have been. He also got a big chunk of money from the 49ers when he left. So, he got paid. Okay, he definitely got paid. Should he be playing in the NFL now? Yeah, he could be a backup. I definitely think he could be a backup. But like I said, he could be a special player that can definitely add to the offense. But again, a lot of teams passed on him because of his limitations, I believe. Okay? There's that old saying that if Charles Manson had any talent, the NFL would have signed him. I believe that because we've seen a lot of guys that have they have done in their past, especially a lot of these guys who have done a lot of crazy shit, have still gone on to sign with teams and whatnot. I think Kaepernick definitely could have played and definitely could be playing. I just don't know if he knows that he's not really a starter anymore. You're not. I mean, let's face it, dude. You've been out of football for 5 years. There's no way you're coming back in this league to start. Now, could they bring him in to battle some guys? Yeah, I think so. Like in Atlanta, he could be in camp dueling with Marcus Mariota. That's a question mark. He could be in camp in Carolina battling with Cam Newton, battling with Sam Darnold, whatever the quarterback situation is with there. The other guy, Walker. There's places he could be definitely battling in. I just don't know how much you're going to get from him at this point because he's removed from the game, okay? And again, you're going to have to change a lot of your offense around him to be what he can because as a pocket quarterback, he does not have that cerebral ability to be that type of guy. And I think that's what a lot of people were under the assumption were. And he wasn't that. I don't think his style of game, his style of play could have lasted that long. I think it went as long as it could. And when things started to crumble around him, they had to look elsewhere. Because let's face it, this is an organization that has been based around quarterbacks. Greatness has been around quarterbacks for a majority of the years, whether it's, Montana, Young, Garcia, Smith, all those guys had a good run. Even Jimmy G, they had a good run. Now I'm not saying that. Well, obviously we know who's the best out of that group, but I don't think Kaepernick really could have been a franchise type of quarterback. Just his style just wasn't. I didn't see it. Okay, and I saw his decline. I mean, if you were watching in those last couple of seasons, predominantly from 2014 on, even though, to be fair, yeah, there were things against him, changing of the head coaches, the decline of the roster. But again, he just didn't seem like a guy that was getting any better. He didn't seem like he was stepping up to that next level, and I just think he lacked the cerebralness of being a natural quarterback. There's only so many guys that have that ability, and those are the greats. And I mentioned Matt Ryan before, and I'm not really a huge Matt Ryan fan, but I respect him. I respect Matt Ryan because he's a damn good quarterback. Is he great? Can he win the big one? No, he has trouble with that. But cerebral he is. And again, I don't. Colin Kaepernick is not in that type of quarterback. He's in the type where he's very athletic, and you can use him certain ways. Personally, I don't think anything's going to come of these tryouts. I think it's the same old story that we've seen. I mean, I think it's good that he's still in good shape. I think it's good that he's still able to do a lot of stuff. And yeah, man, someone, if they need a guy like that, sign him, get him as a backup, do something. You never know what can go from that, but I just don't see it happening. And again, it'll be somewhat interesting to see what happens, but I just think a lot of it also too is just to make a news story, to stay relevant, and obviously he loves the game, but I think the game has changed since he's been in it too a lot. I really do. And again, I think that unless he has changed where he can be a pocket quarterback, he can really, master the offense. He can play in a different offense other than pistol. He can show he can do other things. He's 34, man. It's not old, but it's like, okay, well, what else do you have but that? I personally think his time has come and go. I think he was more of a flash in the pan type guy with extreme athletic ability, but never had the long could I don't think he would have lasted. Longevity was not there. And that's just my opinion. And like I said, I don't know everything. I am not Yoda, but I saw every game he ever played. Okay? And I thought even then that he was extremely gifted athletically, but limited as a quarterback. And personally, I think that Alex Smith was the better quarterback. Maybe not as athletic as Kaepernick was, of course, but was much more cerebral and had a much better understanding of the game, the position, and the offense that he was in. And I think had they would have been able to coexist, perhaps they would have won the Super Bowl. Who knows? It shoulda, woulda, coulda, and you can't really put anything on that, but that's just my opinion. So I thought Smith got the raw end of that deal, and I think that was the wrong way to go because let's face it, from that point on, in 2012, that season of 2012, Alex Smith obviously was then dealt to the Chiefs, and he had a pretty nice run with the Kansas City Chiefs after that. That next season, he led the Chiefs to an 11-4 record. He had great numbers. He had about 60.6 passing percentage, not great there, but he threw for over 3,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Had a damn good year that year. And got the Chiefs into the playoffs. Of course, they didn't. They got knocked out. The next year in 2015, he had a nice 11-5 record. Threw for 3,400 yards, 20 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I mean, his time in Kansas City for 5 years, he was 50-26. Threw for over 17,000 yards, 102 touchdowns, and 33 interceptions. I mean, he was playing lights out. He was doing pretty damn well in Washington, too, until he got injured. So, again, Smith was the better quarterback. I mean, that was obvious. Also, too, to be fair to Smith, how many different offensive coordinators did we see him go through? How many different head coaches did we see him go through? Guy didn't have it easy. Okay. And again, the saying always comes of him, game manager. That's a bullshit term, I feel. That was a term invented to fit the narrative because here's the problem. Sometimes when you go 9 of 12 or 10 of 15, that's the only amount of time you had to throw the ball. Maybe you didn't have to do that because everything else on the offense was working or your defense was really controlling the game, which we see all the time. Now, the narrative in the NFL is throw, yards through the air, touchdowns, great. But that doesn't mean shit. It's very similar to the narrative in the NBA, whereas let's shoot 3-pointers from the rafters, not play defense, not box out, not have a big man. That's bullshit. That's not the game. And eventually, it's going to come back around. So again, if you have a guy who's very cerebral and only has to do so much, I guess if you want to call him a game manager, that's fine. So that means that Joe Namath was a game manager in Super Bowl III. Look at his numbers. He didn't throw an interception. He didn't throw a touchdown. The running game did a lot of the damage. Emerson Boozer, Matt Snell. The defense did a wonderful job. They forced 3 turnovers on Earl Morrall, and the Jet offensive line held them, and they held the clock. So does that make Namath the game manager? I find that to be a bullshit term. So, yeah, Smith got the raw end of the deal. And like I said, listen, Kaepernick, phenomenal athlete. Freakish athlete. Scary. Guy who probably could have played multiple sports. Probably would have been a really good pitcher. Maybe a great relief pitcher, maybe a great closing pitcher, and 6'4", 2. I don't know if he could play basketball, but he had some good size to be a good shooting guard. You never know, man. He was lanky, he was long, he had some freakish talent. But I think his career is finished. He is exactly what he was, and that's that. So, but it will be interesting to see what happens with him. Again, I don't see much coming from it. But hey, listen, I could always be wrong. What do I know? But thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. The greatest fan base in all of sports. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the difference of opinion. I want to hear from you guys. I'm always open to other things, whether it's similarities or differences or whatever. Do me a favor. Please subscribe to the page if you can. Give it a listen. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. The Niner Nut is out.